All right, let's go ahead and get started today. We've got a lot that we're going to kind of cover and we're going to go over, and I'm sure there's going to be questions. So, thanks, guys, for coming out today. Today is going to be a continuation from last month's. So, last month we kind of talked a little bit about just Excel's, how to use certain things about it. And then we started touching on formulas, but I figured let's go ahead and we'll just start from the beginning of formulas as we only talked about a couple of things. So hopefully all of you have that file that I sent out earlier. You will need that if you're going to go ahead and follow along and ask any questions that way. It's just a mocked up data of the NRS report, but that's what we're going to use today. So the big question that I usually end up getting asked is why do we end up using formulas? What's the importance of formulas and different things like that? So formulas can help decrease the amount of time that you spend in Excel. When you ask Excel to do different formulas for you, whether it's simple addition, subtraction, you will just decrease the amount of time that you're spending just in the cells themselves, as well as just figuring out the data. Because if you need to add, say, 100 rows up, Excel can do that in a formula faster than you can probably do that with a keyboard. It also increases your accuracy of your data and reports. There's been many times, especially over the last couple of months, that I've been helping with different data reports. And I've had questions about, is this correct? Is this whatnot? And as we go through each one of them, we'll find that that the accuracy is good for these reports, and that the formulas that we built in there is what accrues to that accuracy. When we start talking about formulas inside of Excel, one important thing to remember is that all formulas in Excel must start with an equal sign. So whether it be the simple formula of sum, SUM, or whether it's something quite out there is what's called the XLOOKUP formula. Remember that all formulas must start with an equal sign when you come into that. And the last thing with formulas is if you ever are using the autocomplete functionality of formulas inside of Excel, you must use the tab button, not the enter button. I still find I do accidentally hit enter sometimes when I do this, and I'll show you what the difference is between both of those as we do go through some of our formulas today. Also, autofill. Autofill is a fabulous function. So if you wanted to create a formula in one row and then you needed to drag or copy that same formula through 100 different rows, there is an autofill functionality. When you select inside of Excel, there is a little green square in the bottom right-hand corner of the highlighted cell that you're in. You can either click on that or and drag it down, or if you double click on that, it will autofill that same formula all the way down. So it's nice to have that. If you do hover over that, the square, the your mouse does become like a thick black plus sign instead of the bigger white plus sign. So that's how you'll know you're in the right area to autofill your formulas down. So let's go ahead and go over some of our formulas that I use on a regular basis. What do they do? How do we use them? That kind of stuff. So my first one that like to use quite a bit is the count formula. The count formula returns the number of cells that have numbers inside of them. Values can be items, cell references, or ranges. When we look at those are the values that you see inside of the parentheses. Now, the key factor about this one that you have to remember is that this returns a list of numbers. So if you remember last time when we talked about numbers, numbers were anything like actual numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Dates count as numbers, formulas count as numbers. Anything that has a character inside of it, so a letter, different things like that, those will all be considered texts, and so this count formula will not work on them. So what I want you to do, and I'm going to go ahead and jump over to a live. We'll jump back and forth between the PowerPoint and the Excel formula, but I want you to go to the Formulas tab, or I want you to go to the Learning Excel data sheet that you have, and down at the bottom, you'll see that I have a Formulas tab. Here, I kind of have some formulas that we're going to go over and kind of what they're and spots for you to do that. So what I want you to do in column B2, I want you to go ahead and hit equals, and then I want you to start typing the word count. Now, if I type COU, you'll see that I have a couple of different options that show up, and my very top one highlighted in blue is count. Now, I told you right at the beginning, remember to hit tab versus enter. If I go ahead and hit enter thinking that's what I'm going to want to select it, you'll see that it comes up with an error name. And if I hover over it, and you'll see up here in the formula bar, it has exactly what I typed, equals COU. That's the reason you need to use tab versus enter. So if I use tab now and I see count and I use tab, that will autofill the rest of the formula in, and it'll open your parentheses and ask for your first variable that's inside of your formula. So what I ask you to do is I want you to go ahead and count everything that is in column A on the NRS registration tab. So once I have it formatted like this, I'll click into the NRS registration tab, and then I'm going to count everything that is inside of A. So I can just click on A. You'll see that I have a little down arrow up at the top. I will then close my parentheses, go ahead and hitting Shift 0, and I'm going to go ahead and hit Enter. You'll see that I end up with 3,976 as my number. um, in C2, right here, I want you to do the same thing. So go ahead and hit equals, start typing the word count, either count, type it all out and open the parentheses or autofill that. And I want you to come back over here to column G. I want you to highlight all of column G, close your parentheses and hit enter. Now, you'll see that in my first value, I ended up with 3,900, almost 4,000 students. In my column G, you'll see that I ended up with 0. That's the reason being is column G, if you look at, is last names. So these are all name fields. Excuse me, column A is letter or is numbers, so it will count the numbers. So I can see that I have 39 records that have numbers inside of them versus that this one doesn't know what to count. So I always get the question, so how do I count for stuff that has really anything in it, whether it be text, formulas, numbers, dates, blank spaces, anything like that? How do I get those to count? So jumping back over to here, that is where we use what is called the counta formula. The A in counta stands for all, so it will count all values. So as you see, it returns the number of cells containing numbers, text, formulas, functions, and empty text, meaning if you simply put a space inside of the cell, it will count that as well. The only thing it does not count are what are called blank cells, meaning that there's nothing in it, no space, no formula, returning nothing, nothing like that. That's the only thing that it will not return are empty cells. So let's go ahead and jump back over to the Excel function, our Excel document, and let's see how this works. So inside of B3, I'm going to go ahead and hit equals, and I'm going to start typing. You'll see that it is my second option down, so I can use my arrow keys to hover or to go down, and I'll hit tab to autofill that across the board. Then I want to count everything that is in column A using the counta formula. So I'll come back over to the NRS registration. I will select all of column A. I'm going to close my parentheses. I'm going to hit enter. And you will see now that I do have uh, 3977. The reason I have that extra one is because this header up here is a text field, meaning that it is only text inside of there. It's not just numbers, so it does now include that in your formula. So I have 3977 rows that have information inside of it in column A. So let's go ahead and do the same thing in column G. I'm going to hit equals. I'm going to type the word counta inside of it. I'm going to autofill that formula. I'm going to go back to my NRS registration. I'm going to highlight all of G. I'm going to close my parentheses and hit enter. And you'll see that I have the same number, 3977. Now, to show you that blank cells are eliminated out of it, if I go ahead inside of here and I'm just going to take out this name right here, I now have a blank cell inside of there. If I go back to my formulas, you'll see that that number does decrease by 1. I am going to undo that as I don't want my information screwed up. So you do see how it can calculate as well as not calculate those with blanks. Is there any questions about using the formulas count and counta? And again, you're welcome to come off of mute, or you can um, type in the chat. All right.
Adam?
Yeah, go ahead, Jamie.
I'm just struggling. So to select the whole column, do I just click the header cell, like the one that has the A or the G in it?
Yeah, so if you want to select
Okay.
the entire head, if the entire column itself,
Uh-huh.
hover over where the letters are up top. You'll see that mine kind of highlights it in a green, and I have the
Yeah.
down arrow
Okay.
on it. That's how I'll select.
Yeah.
And the same thing works with rows as well. If I want to select an entire row, I can come over to any one of these numbers, and I can highlight cross, and it will do the same thing. So yeah, that's how you can select this
Okay.
entire
That's
column
what
or
I
row.
thought. It's not working for me, but I'm sure I know how to do it. So
Okay, perfect.
not a problem.
All right. Any other questions?
Adam,
Yes.
I don't understand when you say delete the parenthesis.
Not delete the parenthesis. You're going to close the parenthesis.
Okay.
So every formula, and this works for every formula is going to always start with an equal sign. I'm going to have whatever my formula name is. In this case, I'm just going to put blah, blah, just so that it doesn't actually pick up anything. And then all formulas open with a parenthesis. You're going to have stuff inside of it, whether most of them have stuff inside of it. We'll actually go through a couple of them that don't. And then you need to close your parenthesis. So there's not a deleting of a parenthesis. It's always you're going to open and close a parenthesis inside a formula. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. Okay, we're going to go into another one. So the next one that I'm going to talk about is called concat. That's the short name of it. Um, the longer version's name is concatenate, meaning to combine. So there's two ways to concatenate or concat different things. You can use the formula itself with it, which is equals concat, and then open your parentheses, and then you'll select what you want to mix together. The other way, and the shortened way that I usually use, is what's called using that ampersand sign. Now, the ampersand sign should be Shift 7 on your keyboard. That is the official name of that symbol. But let's go. We're going to go ahead and combine them. I'm going to use both I'm going to use the concat and show you how it works, as well as using the ampersand and show you how it works, and kind of show you the difference between the two. Now, the big reason is why would we use something like this? Is why would I combine two things? Is our NRS registration has a good example of why I would do this. Inside of here, you'll see that I have both last name and first name as two separate fields. Well, maybe I want to combine these into one. That way I can make a list or do something like that. And so I need the last name and first name combined, whether that be first name space last name or last name comma first name. It doesn't really matter how it works. You use concatenate the same exact way. So what I want to do is I want to put the last name and first name together, and I usually want to do that next to wherever my information is. So I'm going to right click on column H, meaning I'm going to select all of column H, and I'm going to click insert, meaning I want to add a new column that I'm going to add. I'm going to give this a title just called full name. I get into a habit of always labeling whatever my header row is. That way, in case I have questions later about what is this row supposed to be, especially when I start doing formulas or different things like that, or flags using just X's or different things, I always want to make sure that I know what that row column is supposed to be. So I want to combine, and this first one I'm going to combine, and I want it to be first name and last name, to where it looks like the student typed it out or the system typed it out. And I'm going to use the concat formula first to do this. So in H2, I'm going to hit equals, and I'm going to type concat. You'll see that that's my top one after I write CON. I'm going to tab that over. And then these little help things that show up, these little gray fields, they are prompts to help you fill out the rest of the formula. And so you'll see that it says text one, comma, dot, 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 meaning that there's additional things that I can put there. So I want the first one to be the first name. I can simply select the cell itself. You'll see that it autofills to F2. And if I try to just click G2, you'll see that it changes. So if I want to combine them, I've got to select my first value that I want. I've got to hit comma, and then I've got to select my second value. And so those are the two that I want to combine together. If I close my parenthesis right here and hit enter, you'll see that it comes up and it does combine them all together. Now, we see that there is an issue with this. Does anybody understand and know why there is no space between the two?
You actually need to tell it to put a space, and I remember it has something to do with having a space in parentheses or quotation marks.
Correct. So yes. So Jamie is correct. So I do need to, when I build these formulas, when I'm concatenating or combining my cells, I need to tell the system exactly what I want. So if I want a space in there, if I want a comma in there, when I make up email addresses just to kind of autofill, I can do the same thing with this. So like Jamie said, I need to tell the system that I want a space in there. So as she said, I need to do it inside of quotes. So I'm going to open and close a set of double quotes. And then I'm just going to put a blank space in between those. And then I'm going to put a comma after that second double quote. And you'll know you've done it right when F2 is highlighted in blue. You'll have the double quotes in between, and G2 is highlighted in red. So your G2 should be this quote text 3 inside of your help. So as soon as you have all of that, you can go ahead and hit enter, and you will now see that I now have the first name with a space, and I do have a last name. So that's how you use the concat to do that. Now we can do the exact same thing using the ampersand. And what I want to do is I'm going to do this one as a last name, comma, first name. So I'm going to start my formula. Again, this is a formula, yes, but you're not using a formula name. It is kind of the one rarity that we that we use. So I'm going to hit equals. I'm going to select G2 or G3 in this case. I am going to use my ampersand instead of a comma because I'm not filling in a formula. Then I'm going to open a set of quotes. I'm going to put my comma and a space because that's the formatting that I want every one of them to have. I'm going to close my set of double quotes. I'm going to add a second ampersand sign. I'm going to select the first name of this row, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. So now you can see that for this student, I now have Akbar, comma, Dansley. Now, again, when I was talking about autofilling earlier, I can come back into this and you'll see that I have this little square in the corner. If I hover over it, you'll see it becomes that thick black plus. If I double click on that all the way down, you'll see it autofills that formula all the way down to the very bottom. So if I jump all the way down to the bottom, you'll see that all the way down to my very last row of 3977, you'll see that it autofills correctly. So I'll jump back up to the top. Again, remember jumping up and down, left and right. You can use control and your arrow keys. We talked about that a little bit last time. That's how you can jump through your data fairly quick. Again, remembering that it does hit the first blank cell that it does run into. Are there any questions about using the concat formula or using the ampersand formula?
I do have a question about it's mostly between the types of Excels. I opened this one that we're working on of the template
Uh-huh.
in Google Sheets. And I guess when you go over to the corner, the actual cross, it doesn't go bold. So I guess it's just depending on if you're using Google like
Yeah.
Sheets, Excel is different. So I just like dragged it all the way down. I don't know if you know like a command that does something similar.
Yeah, so Google Sheets does have something similar. Google Sheets sometimes doesn't like to just use the double click to autofill. And so again, with the autofill function, so if I wanted to use the concat versus this one, I can simply hover over that corner. It is the same corner. I will let you know that it is the same bottom corner. And you can click and drag so you can see how my highlight becomes longer. And I can just drag this all the way down to the bottom. Now, when I've got, 3,000 rows like I do, this might take a couple seconds for me to go all the way down to the bottom. And then I can release. And again, it will now change it to the first name space last name. I can see that all my formula is in there. So there is the same autofill functionality inside of Google Sheets, but sometimes that double click just doesn't work. Google Sheets also has a funky autofill feature that it sometimes does to where it will guess that you want to autofill it all the way down. And so sometimes when you start typing in your formula, it will show you like a ghost text of what's going to be autofilled down below. And if you hit enter, it autofills it for you without having to do that. So, but it doesn't always do that. Like I haven't figured out the rhyme or reason on why it does and why it doesn't. But I will tell you that Google Sheets does autofill. It just might not be the same UI display. So the user interface display might be slightly different.
Yeah, no, it did display that, and I pretty much clicked on no because I wanted to see if we had that option as you do in Excel. And it quite doesn't do it. It's like you said, you just have to drag it. So I just figured to
Yep.
ask you, but yeah,
Yep.
it's all good.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. So one question that I want to ask before I kind of move on, um, why why am I using what are called cell references instead of hard coding in the names itself? Does anybody know why I use the cell references?
Just in case you have to do like more data, like add data after or
Yeah,
edit
yeah.
to it.
So that's one. So if I needed to add more rows down at the very bottom, it's going to use it's going to use the same kind of functionality. The way Excel works and Google Sheets does the exact same thing. When I type these in, Google Sheets and Excel does not recognize this as F2. When I type a formula in here, it's using what is called cell references. So what it actually identifies as is from where my formula is, I want to find my whatever is inside of 2 rows back and no rows up and down. I want to add the manual space, and then I want to add 1 row back, no space up and down. So if I take this exact same formula here, and if I paste it in over, say, this last name right here, you'll see it takes the exact same cell references, meaning it takes my one that's 2 over, adds the space, and then 1 over. And so that's why a lot of cell references are used, is because I can also change this data to, I'm going to change it to my name, and you'll see that it automatically changes. So cell references are very critical when you're using formulas, not to necessarily hard code what is called hard coding in the formulas. That way, when you change a value, or as Andrew stated, when you copy and paste or fill the information down, it will take the same information that you already have, and it will just fulfill it, or it'll just add it correctly. So as you do add formulas into all of your Excel sheets, do remember that it's more important to use the cell references that you want versus hard coding in any sort of value. All right. Any additional questions on the concat formula that we've used? Okay, we're going to go into some date formulas that I use. And so the two that I use on a regular basis are called what is now called now and today. Now returns the current date and time, and the formula today returns the current date. The interesting thing about these formulas are these take no parameters, but they do require a set of empty parentheses. One interesting thing about using now and today is that they will continually update the worksheet every time the worksheet is refreshed. So what does it mean to refresh the sheet? When you enter a brand new set of data and hit enter to confirm that data inside of there, that means that the data has updated, and so you'll see that it updates. When you close down an Excel sheet and reopen it, that will also refresh all of your values. You can also force this sheet to refresh all of your calculated values by pushing F9. That's a forced recalculation, and you'll kind of see how that works when we do use these. So what I want to do is on your formulas tab inside of B6 and B7, I want you to add this now and today formula. So coming back over to here, I'm going to go here. So inside of B6, I'm going to hit equals. I'm going to type now. And then remember, I've got to open and close a set of parentheses, and then I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to do the same thing with today. I'm going to hit equals. I'm going to write today. I can open and close a set of parentheses, and I'm going to hit enter. And you'll see that it's going to pull today's date. Now, you'll see that this one automatically calculated that it is 15:26, so military time. I'm looking at my clock right now. It is now 3:27. So if I force this to refresh, meaning I'm going to hit F9 on my keyboard, you'll see that it now changes to 15:27. It won't automatically do it again until the sheets are refreshed. So I get questions sometimes, why is this important? Why do I need to do this? Well, for our purposes, I like to do this when I start calculating students' retention, for example. So if a student hasn't separated from your program, meaning they have a blank separation date inside of the system, in order for the formula to work correctly, I need a date in there for, say, when I'm adding or subtracting dates. And so I will use this now or today formula in order to autofill today's date in there so that I can actually use a formula to calculate that information. So that's the big reason that I'll do that. Also, if you're simply wanting to update or you want a date to update every time you open a spreadsheet to update the information inside of there, this is a good formula to have. Just say up inside of one of your corners. You can just put last updated. For example, I would put, say, last updated. I would put then inside of this one, I could put today's formula. If I actually cared about the time that it was done as well, I could put now. And then I could make my information. That would keep me when I last updated. I could close that. And then the next time I would open up this to re-update the information, this would automatically update for me. So it just kind of give you information about when information was last updated. But again, I primarily use it to figure out students' retention dates and different things like that. Which is what we're going to move into. We are going to move into a very unique formula. It's probably one of the harder formulas to kind of understand and remember, just because of how it's built inside of Excel. Those that are using Google Sheets, it does help and give you some prompts, but Excel does not. So we're going to use what is called the date diff formula. Diff is spelled D-I-F in this case. What it does is it returns the time between two dates in months, days, or years. That is what this unit is at the end. So you see we have a start date, we have an end date, and we have a unit. Again, it will return in months, days, or years. Those units are done in this format. So it's inside of double quotes. You will type D, M, or Y depending on what it is. Now, why is this such a funky little formula and why does Excel not have a whole lot of prompts? It's because date diff is known as what is called a compatibility function. meaning that it does work in all versions of Excel, but it doesn't have a help menu. I believe that a help menu will be coming for it in probably an update in probably the next major update, as it is being one that is being used on a more regular basis. But at least as of right now, it doesn't have a help menu, meaning you need to put a start date here, an end date here, in a unit. However, I will say in Google Sheets, it does give you that you need a start date, an end date, and a unit. So it does have a help menu versus Excel. I absolutely love this quote. It's one that I found years ago, and it states, "Date diff is treated as the drunk cousin of the formula family. Excel knows that it lives a happy and useful life, but will not speak of it in polite conversations." That is the help menu, meaning that it won't speak of it. It's one that I use on a very regular basis. I use it all the time to figure out different things. Again, it's primarily between date diffs, but I use this a lot in retention. So I do want to show you how this is going to be done. So I do want to show, we're going to jump over to the Excel, and I want to show you how this is done. So let's go ahead and jump into the NRS registration tab. And I want to scroll over next to the NRS separation column, which is this AA. The way I'm going to do this is I want to create a how long a student has been inside of our program. So I want to right click on AB. I'm going to insert a new column because this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to put something like number of days. And that's probably enough information to give me exactly what I want. Now I'm going to hit equals because I'm going to start typing in this. I'm going to type date diff. Now you'll see that no prompt comes up, nothing like that. So this is one you have to spell out completely. I'm going to open a set of parentheses, and you'll see that it does recognize it. Again, this is the most prompt you are going to get is, hey, it does exist. Again, it's compatibility, but I'm not going to help you with it. So the first thing that it looks for is, what is my start date? Where am I trying to calculate this date from? So I'm going to select the registration date, which is in column Y. I'm going to hit a comma. And then the second thing it looks for is, what is the end date? In this case, it is the separation date. So it's what is in AA2. The last thing it's looking for is the number of units. How are you trying to calculate this? Are you trying to calculate this in a number of days, in a number of months? What are you trying to do? In this case, let's go ahead and do the number of days. So again, I'm going to open a set of double quotes. I'm going to hit D, and I'm going to close my quotes. I'm going to close my parentheses, and I'm going to hit enter. Now, you'll see one thing. It calculates this in what looks a very funky date. That's because when I inserted, it was using this column next to it to say, oh, I think this is what you want the format to be. I'm just going to come up here into this numbers section under the home tab. I'm going to select general, meaning I want no specific number or no specific format. And I'm going to select general, and you'll see that I now have 34. So if I were to look at this between 8/28 of 2023 and 10/1 of 2023, the student was in our program for 34 days. I want to autofill this all the way down, so I'm going to click the double fill. But you see immediately I've got a problem. This second one says, hey, it's an error. It's an error of some sort. When you look on this, I can show my calculation steps. I can get help with my error. That's probably the hardest thing about formulas is if you do get errors, just trying to find out what's going on. Actually, this little show calculation steps is a fantastic way to really kind of plug in and see what's going on. This is a little small, so I'm hoping you can kind of see what it is, but it says, hey, here's my evaluation, what's going on. So you'll see that there is a 5-digit number here. That's the date reference. You'll see I have a 0 for some reason inside of there. And then I've got my D. If I hit evaluate, you'll see I have a number. What the error is stating is that there is some value missing here in this separation value. So again, going back to what we just talked about using that now or date time, I'm going to use this filter function that is built inside of there. I'm going to deselect everything that has a date, and I want to select only those that have a blank in there. And then in those, I'm going to hit equals. I'm going to type in today. And you can type in today or now. It really doesn't matter. And I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to take that formula and I'm going to autofill it all the way down, meaning that I'm going to just fill in every blank cell that with using this today formula. Now I can go ahead and clear my filters. We talked about this last month. Now you'll see that I no longer have blank ones, but now I have numbers inside of them, meaning that it is now taking the calculation between this date and representing it in the number of days. Now, this data is more than a month old, so I probably won't see anything less than probably 30 days. But if I go ahead and I'm going to sort this largest to smallest, again, I can do that in the function, or I can come up here into sort filter, sort smallest to largest. Oh, you'll see that I actually do have a couple of 0 days and a couple of single digit days. That's because they had a begin and an end date already in the system. But this is how you can see, what is my time? Then you can start running other formulas on like, what is my average number of days? What is my minimum? What is my maximum? You can start running those kind of things. If you're expecting to see, say, an average a number of days in your students, so I've got 3,900 students. I want to see potentially, looks like my autofill didn't fill in all the way down, so I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste that all the way down, and let's resort this, smallest to largest. If I highlight all of these, we talked a little bit about this. Down here in this bottom corner, again, these are super tiny, I know. Hopefully you can see it a little better on yours. Um, Google Sheets also has a similar functionality. You can see that it has an average. Mine has a count, and it has a number, and it has a sum. These are all display settings that you can turn on and turn off in your side of yours. If you don't see these, you can right click down here on this bottom tab and see the different kind of status things that you can do. Caps lock, num lock, average, count, numerical count, min, max, whatever you want, you can add that. I usually like to just see my count, average, and sum of all of those. So what I can tell you right now is looking at this, that the students in this program, as of today, have an average of 277 days in my program. Is that good? Is that bad? I would have to look into additional details in order to do that. But as program managers, as directors in your program, this is something that I would say that you'd want to kind of have a target on, is just to say, hey, I want to make sure students are spending at least this amount of time. If you had a target saying, hey, I want to make sure that every student under 30 days is, inside of our program, that we're working with them, I can come down here and say, okay, I want to highlight everybody that is under 30 days. And if they're still here, I want to contact them, see what's going on, make sure that, they feel included, that they know that we're, watching out for them. Different things like that. So this is how you can use the date diff formula to really dig into your number of days, your retention, that kind of stuff. So all of the information that I give out in directors meetings, things that Stephanie will send out as well, this is how we come up with what your average days of retention are. This is the average days of attendance for different things like that. That's how we come up with this information. Are there any questions about using the date diff formula? And again, we did this just simply based on days, but you can change this to months. So if you're expecting your students to stay for a while and you want to see months, you simply just change that D to an M, and that will start including that. All right. Okay. We're going to jump into, that's kind of all the formulas that I'm really going to cover. There are tons of formulas inside of Excel that you can have. But again, I wouldn't overwhelm yourself on having to know all the formulas. Just get to know a handful of formulas that work for you. And then you can always, honestly, Google is your friend. You can always jump in and see different formulas that you need. If you say, hey, I'm kind of looking for this, Excel probably has some sort of formula, or it might be multiple types of formulas that you can use. Kathleen, you have a question.
Yeah, in the past, you used to have this beautiful cheat sheet of which code I need to type what in for. Do you still have that? And would you be
I
willing to send it to us?
I do. The cheat sheet she is talking about. So I made up years ago, and I always add and remove depending on the types of conversations that I have. I have this cheat sheet that kind of shows you, hey, if you're looking for this, this is the formula you're looking for. If you're trying to do this, this is the formula you're looking for. I think it's this one or it's this one. Let me take a look. Yep, it's this one. Okay, so this is the formula she's kind of this is what she's talking about, and I will send this out in Friday's email. Um, but what you can see is here's just a list of different formulas that we have. What are something called dynamic arrays? Again, you can look into those. But this is what she's talking about. So the average formula, again, you want to see an average of days a student has been there, you can use that. You want to find the minimum or maximum value that is provided in that. So this would be a good one to see. Do you have any 0 days? Do you have what's your maximum number of days? Again, you'll see that there are tons in here. There are actually probably two. Yep, there are two that I am going to remove. It is this V lookup and H lookup. Those are no longer, those are what are called being deprecated, meaning that Excel is getting rid of them. They are both being replaced for this X lookup. So I will update this, but I will send this out to you guys. That way you do have a cheat sheet of different formulas. If you want additional formulas, again, there are plenty of documentation on Excel or on Google and online that you can find and do that. But I will send this out. Thank you, Kathleen, for remembering that. All right, we've got about 20 minutes left, which is, I will tell you, never enough time for pivot tables. But we are going to scratch the surface of pivot tables. So I apologize if I'm going to go a little fast. I do want to get the information out to you on kind of what pivot tables are and how they are used. Pivot tables are fabulous to use if you do not know how to use them already. Bill Jellens, he's known as Mr. Excel throughout a lot of the Microsoft world. He states that no other tool inside of Excel gives you the flexibility and analytical power of a pivot table. They are super powerful to use inside of Excel. They're a great way to grab a lot of data and sum it up into maybe 5 or 6 rows, depending on the information. They're a great way to just see groups of students, groups of information, and you'll see a lot of what we're talking about inside of that. I will say pivot tables are a lot of fun. Once you do start to understand how they are used, you really can't break anything inside of pivot tables. It may not show you the information you're looking for initially, but you really can't break anything. The reason why you can't break anything is it really takes a quick snapshot of what your data is, and then it sends it off to another sheet, and then you kind of play with it there. You'll see what I mean by all of that as we do start to get inside of here. A couple of quick things that I want to talk to you about with pivot tables. One, your data does need to be organized in columns with headings. Merged columns are a big no-no with pivot tables. Pivot tables do not like merged columns and it makes a lot of sense with the way you'll start seeing how pivot tables are worked. Make sure you also have headers on your pivot tables. Headers are super critical because whether you have a header or not, whatever your first row of data is, that is what is going to be used as your header row. So if it is data that you want to be calculated inside, it's not going to calculate that. It's going to use it as a header. So please make sure you use headers inside of your pivot tables. Again, anything you download from Excel and the upcoming UASys will have headers. So you won't need to add that. But again, if you added something like what we did on like a formula, you may have to add a header so that the Excel recognizes it. Do not have any blank columns or rows. You can have blank cells. So like if a student didn't have a pretest, for example, and it was blank, that is okay. But if you have a completely blank row or a blank cell, then it's going to screw up the data and it's going to kind of cut the data off. The data inside of that needs to also be consistent. So make sure dates are with dates, numbers are with numbers, text are with text. Once you start mixing and matching, Excel is going to run into a headache and say, I don't know what this really is. So it's going to guess, and it will probably guess wrong. So we're going to go ahead and go into the pivot table worksheet, and we're going to build our pivot table. So let me jump back over to Excel and I'll walk you guys through the steps. So to build pivot tables, it's really easy to build the pivot table to say, I want a pivot table on this data. You simply click anywhere inside of your data. It can be at your header row. It can be inside of the data itself. It doesn't matter where, excuse me, that data is. Once you're inside of your data, go ahead and click Insert up at the very top, and you're going to click on Pivot Tables. Just click it, and you'll come up with this. It's going to ask you a couple of questions. One, is this table or range that you're looking for? Now, being that I was selected inside of my information, it's going to say that your data is from A1 to CM3977. Now, I know I have 3977 rows, so that looks right. I could scroll over and find if CM is my last data, but I do know that that is correct. So just make sure that you are selected there. You can select an entire column. That is okay. It's just blank cells down at the bottom. That does kind of throw off some of your data depending on what you're doing. So I would recommend not selecting the entire rows if you can help it. The second question it asks is, where do you want this to be placed? Do you want it on a new worksheet or do you want it on an existing worksheet? If so, where? Most pivot tables I would recommend putting on a new worksheet. Keep your pivot tables and your raw data separate from each other. It just makes things a lot cleaner. So I'm going to leave it selected as new tables, and then I'm going to hit OK. From there, congratulations, you made your very first pivot table if you've never done it before. It really is that simple to make a pivot table. What's hard is doing everything with a pivot table. What do you want the information to look like? That kind of information. Couple things you'll see when you actually start doing this. Over here on the side, you will have a list of what looks to be column headers, and that's exactly what these are. So you can see I have a student first name, I have a student ID, I have my program names, I've got my last name, my first name. Anything that was on this NRS registration report is now available for me to grab inside of this. We also have filters, columns, rows, values. We'll get into those as we start building our pivot table. So this is what your sheet should look like. Then you have to start designing your pivot table. If you're like me and you take orders from someone higher than you, most likely they've kind of given you what they want the pivot table to look like. I'm interested in this information. I want to see the number of students that have pre-tests. I want to see the number of male and female students that are inside of our program. That kind of information. If you are coming up with the data, what do you want it to be? You got to select your columns, your rows, your values, different things like that. I'm going to go ahead and give you something pretty simple, pretty easy. I want you to select the ethnicity for the rows. I want the columns to be your genders. And then I want you to do a student ID. I want to see how many students of each one of those there are. So let's jump back to our pivot tables. I am going to come over here. And again, I said I wanted ethnicity. So I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to find ethnicity, which is right here. I'm going to click the checkbox and it's going to add it to my rows. You can now see I have American Indian, Asian, Black, Hispanic, all of my NRS ethnicities. Now, the second thing I asked for was gender. So if I scroll down just a little bit farther, it's just underneath. Now, if I click gender, you will see that it adds it as a second row. It adds it as a subheader for each one of these. That's okay, depending on the data you're wanting for. But I want this as a column because I don't want two rows. I just want one row for each one of them. So I'm going to come down here to gender. You'll see that it ends up with a four-headed arrow. And I'm going to click and I'm going to drag it into columns and I'm going to release it. You'll see now that I'm back to my single rows for ethnicity and I've got my male, female as my column headers. The last thing I want is I want a count of student IDs. So I'm going to scroll up to the top as I know student ID is my first column, and I'm going to click the checkbox. Looking at this, looks very wrong. There's no way that I have 35, 4, 12 Alaskan Natives in my program. So what's going on? You'll see down here in the values, it says sum of student ID. Sum is not I want. I'm not wanting to calculate, add all of their student IDs up. That's just not the information I want. So I'm going to click on this. And again, you just go ahead and click on it and click on value field settings. That will pop up with this box. And you'll see by default, sum is what has come up. I actually want to select this count option because I want to count the number of students. And I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Now these are numbers that are starting to look more recognizable. So you'll see that right here in the corner is my grand total, 3976. That's the number I'm expecting to see. But you'll see that I have 20 American females inside of my program. I've got 13 American Indian or Alaskan Native males, giving me a grand total of 33. So that's how you can use and build different pivot tables inside of all of this. One thing where I also want is if you wanted to narrow down, say for example, oh, I want to know who these 30 or who these 28 female Native Hawaiian or Island Pacificers are. How can I find that without having to go through all the headache of doing a bunch of filters? Pivot tables are super nice that you can double click on that number and it will give you the filtered list of exactly who those students are. So if you were building these pivot tables and you were finding a specific population, whether you needed to contact or whether you were trying to schedule for classes or whatever it happened to be, maybe there's an IET program, maybe there's a scholarship for a specific group of students. This is how you can find out who those students are without having to go through a bunch of filters on your raw data. I'm going to jump back over to sheet 1, which is my pivot tables. After you have all of your information, before I do that, are there any questions? I know there might be, and I'm running out of time. I did say we'd end at 4, which I'm still holding in myself to. Are there any questions about building this simple pivot table? All right. Okay. Pivot tables are fantastic. However, sometimes you need to build more than one. So you can go through and you can deselect all of your stuff, but sometimes your pivot tables look like what mine do, and I might have 3 or 4 rows. I might have one column, and I have a couple of different values. And being that we have over 80 different columns on our NRS registration, I may not know where they all are. So you can clear all of it by a simple action up at the very top. So if I click into my pivot table, you'll see I have a pivot table analyzed, or yours might just say analyze up at the top. If I click onto that, I'll have a clear option underneath my actions. I'll click onto that and hit clear all, and you'll see that it erases all of my information. Again, my sheet 2 that I analyzed or that I dug into is still there because that was a whole new sheet that it kind of copied everything over to. But my pivot table itself is still there. Now going into a couple of different things, this filter option can be super powerful depending on what you want to use it for. Maybe you want to gain a specific, you want to focus in on a specific area of your data. Maybe in this case, I want to focus specifically on, say, functioning levels. I want to see functioning levels for a specific group. So what I want to do is I want to grab, and we're going to do this by ethnicity and gender because that's just one of my easier ones to kind of look at. So I want to select my ethnicity and gender. And again, I'm going to go ahead and move my gender up into columns. But I want to look at my starting fiscal EFL. Now, if I scroll down, you're going to have to find it. It's about a third of the way down. From here, you can actually just click and drag into your filter option. If you just simply click the check mark, it will come down here into rows. But I want it up here in my filter option. And again, I'm going to drag my student ID in. Again, since it's based on sum again, I'm going to turn it into a count. Now, again, I see my 3976, but you'll see I have a new row up at the very top. This is where my filters come into play. So now I'm going to click my filters. I want to see ABE level 4. I'm going to hit OK. Now you'll see that here is my demographic breakdown of my students that are ABE level 4. You'll see I have 5 American Indian Alaskan Native females. I have 4 males of the same. I've got 78 white females. I've got 152 female Hispanic Latinos. If I wanted to change this and see, okay, how does my ESL population look for level 3? I'll do that. Again, you'll see that some of my rows now disappeared. Why did they disappear? Because the information is no longer there. So this is a way that you really can dig down into specific portions of the data. You do have the options with filters to select more than one. If you do this select multiple, now I can grab, say, ESL level 2 and 3 and hit OK. And again, I can do a breakdown on multiples. So if you want to see kind of just a focus on a specific portion of your data, filters work fantastic. If you're wanting to see a broad range, but still wanting to see all of your data, maybe put everything into rows. That might be more beneficial. Let's see. I'm not going to do this. I'm kind of running out of time. You can group your information. So if you wanted to group all based on, say, age at entry, you can do that. Again, you'll see up on the screen kind of how to do this. I am recording this so you can go back through and kind of do that. If you do have any questions, go ahead and let me know. I am happy to jump onto a call with you with your own data, and we can start looking at some of this and seeing exactly how some of that works. This is the drill down data I did talk about. And the last thing I want to talk about is that you can actually turn some of these into percentages. So it's nice to talk about numbers as a whole, but when I start talking and comparing information between programs, it's really hard to compare, say, our Horizonte program or our Granite program with someone like Morgan or Tooele, for example, that are a lot smaller. So I usually turn a lot of these values into percentages. It's pretty easy to do that kind of let me go. Oops. Let me get rid of starting. And actually, I'm going to get rid of gender. So, for example, I just want to get my ethnicity and I want to break it down. I want to see my percent population. The easiest way that you can do that one of two ways. You can either leave your numbers and turn that into a percentage, or I just want to show you, you can actually drag a second option of your student ID in. You can have 2 columns of that. I'm going to turn that into account as well. You'll see that the numbers are the same. However, inside of this column, if I were to right click and I go down to show value as, you'll see I've got a bunch of different options. The one I'm looking for here is percent of grand total. When I click onto that, you'll see that I now have these numbers actually are break down into your percentages. So my American Indian Alaska Native accounts for 0.83% of my grand total population. You'll see that my Hispanic Latino accrues to more than half of my percentage of population. You'll see my whites consists of almost 20% of my population. So when I give you information every week or in our meetings, and I'm breaking things down into percentages, this is how I've come up with those percentages. As I build pivot tables for your programs for that distinct population that I'm looking for, and then I turn it into a percentage. So I'm not actually manually calculating all those. Sorry to burst your bubble if you think I really am. I'm using Excel on a lot of this and actually how I'm doing that. That's all we've got time for today. There is a lot more into pivot tables you can dig into. There are plenty of YouTube videos and other things that you can jump into. Are there any last minute questions that you have before I let you guys go?
I do have one, and I guess it's not a lot related with the pivot table or like anything in Excel. It's more of like Utopia and how to download the reports so we can have the database needed from all of our programs in order to actually do this type of like data filters. So if it's more related to like my individual question, maybe I can just email you if that's easier, and I can leave somebody else to
Yeah,
have another
again,
question.
it's a good question because I've been dealing a lot with all Excel and how does that work. All of our reports are exportable into Excel, whether that be a specific no or a specific alert like your missing entering EFL alert, or if you're going into NRS registrations, or say even your NRS tables. Those are all exportable into Excel. If you're on the reports to where you're using the filters and whatnot, down at the very bottom, the last option is how you want to run that report, whether you want to run it based on PDF or Excel. But that is a good question. You can export all of these into Excel. And then from there, that's where you can mess with them with formulas or pivot tables or sort and filter different things like that.
Okay, I guess my question was more how you can merge downloading or those reports into Excel if you have different programs. For the programs I work for, we have about 5 different programs, and so I have to go to one individual one in order to take that report and then like merge them together into an Excel data. So I guess my question was like if there's any report that you can run for like all of the programs together, or do you have to do it individually getting into each one program?
So some of the reports allow me to do multiple programs. Other reports I do have to run on a case by case basis. Sometimes there are also or times in which I want to combine two different reports. For example, if one report had good information on, say, testing, and another one had good information on, say, contact hours, maybe I want to combine those. There is a way to do that. It's a little bit more in depth. I would say what would probably be best is go send me an email with kind of what you're looking for, because this might be more related just specifically to your program or to the information you're looking for. And I'm happy to dig into it with you and say, okay, well, this where it might work for this might work for that, or we can run this report and it shows you all the information that you're looking for.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Perfect. Any other questions?
Thank you for your time, Adam.
Thanks, Jamie. All right, guys, thanks very much. Again, we'll have our meeting next month. So keep an eye out for a flyer on that, and we will see you guys then.